Okay, so now I want to take a look at the average time to resolution. And we'll look at that by contact type and then by area as well. But first, we'll take a look at the minimum, the maximum, and the average, and we'll see what kind of data we're playing with. So I've got a new sheet here, and I've renamed it resolution. So we're going to want the min, the max, the average. And so I'm just going to start typing my formulas here. So equals min, open brackets. We can go to our merge data tab, and then we can find the time to resolution there, close brackets. But I want to show you a better way of doing that. So equals max, and I'm going to start typing in the name of the table. So merged data. So that comes up. And then we're going to open square brackets, and then you can choose which column you want to use, which I think is really cool. So we'll go time to resolution, tab, then we'll close square brackets, enter. Perfect. And then copy paste, and we're going to change this to the average. There we go. Cool. So our minimum is 0, our maximum is 28, our average is 13.028. So our range is 28. So next I'm going to do a box plot just to see where most of my data is falling. So if I go into the merge data tab, highlight the time to resolution, and then we will insert recommended charts, all charts, box and whisker. Okay, I'm going to take that from there. So Control X and Control V. Okay, and we'll add the data labels as well. So I can see the 28 is a bit of an outlier, 0 is a bit of an outlier, most of it's between 8 and 18. Cool. What I'm going to do next is I'll create a histogram. So I'm going to do that with the help of my good friend Pivot Table. So back into merge data, table design, pivot table. I actually want this in my existing worksheet. So we'll pop it there. Okay. And then we've got time to resolution is going to be our rows. I'm going to pull in ID as account. And then I'll create that as a graph. And then we can group this. So I'm going to group, starting at 0, ending at 28. And let's group it by 6. So that'll give us about 5, 6, something like that. Great. So that we can see the kind of skew, we can see where everything's falling, and that's just a really quick way of developing a histogram. So now I'm going to take a look at this question here. Which users have the highest number of tickets? So I'll go back into merge data and I'll get a new pivot table. I'm going to have my count of ID, and then I'm going to bring user ID down into rows. So we've got heaps and heaps and heaps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize this. So go into this drop down on the row labels, value filters, and then I just want to look at the top 10. And now I've got user ID, which might not be that useful. So I can change that to customer last name, and we'll just pull user ID out. I'll just change this to top 10 again. There we are. Cool, so that's my top 10. And if we wanted to get a bit more granular, we can take a look at the way that they're contacting us. So I've pulled in contact into our columns there. And I'm just going to change this chart to be a bit more readable. So instead of a clustered column, I'm going to make it a stacked column. So we can still easily see which ones are higher than others. And I'm going to pop the data labels in there. So I'm back in my Define tab, and I'm going to have a look at this question here. So what is the average time to resolution? And is this impacted by different areas or contact types? So I'm going to come back here to my resolution tab, and I'm going to copy and paste this pivot table, and we'll change this around. So time to resolution, I want to be my average. And we're going to have a look at what type of impact area has. So we can see they're all pretty similar. This chart isn't really the best example of that. As you can see, the difference here is what, 0.6. So this is an example of a bad chart. Instead, if you wanted to show this, you'd probably look at changing this, the bounds. So you can right click here and format axis, and then you probably want to look at the minimum of 0. And you should probably do that most of the time, unless you have a specific reason not to, in which case you should really highlight that. So I mean, that's looking at that graph, that's a bit more realistic. Okay, so there's not really any impact of the different areas. So we'll get rid of that, and we'll take a look at the contact type. Okay, and again, it doesn't really look like, I'm just going to format that again because it's very misleading. So there we go. Again, there's not too much of a difference. So I'm going to take a look at some of the other metrics I've got here. So instead of that, what I want to look at is satisfaction. So we've got a satisfaction score of 1 to 10, and we'll take a look at that. So here, this is quite interesting because we can see that some of our lower satisfactions actually have a lower average time to resolution, which means the tickets are being resolved faster, but this doesn't necessarily correlate with the customers being more satisfied. In fact, it's the opposite. So this is a really good finding that we could highlight for our intended audience. Now what I want to show you is how you can dynamically update this visualization using a timeline slicer. So I'm going to click into the table that relates to this chart, and then in the Insert tab, I'm going to insert a timeline slicer. So that'll be on received date. And what this does is it'll filter this data for whatever I choose here. So for example, if I just wanted to look at the data in January, that all dynamically updates. So this is a really cool way of helping your client help themselves. It's not going to be necessary or warranted in every case, but this is a way that you could start to build out a dashboard that can be interacted with. So for example, you could have a whole bunch of different charts that are all looking at this one slicer, and then you could go, okay, well, let's have a look at February's data. You'd click that, and then everything would update. So I just wanted to show you that really cool piece of, that really cool tool within Excel.